The Finger Lakes region is one of the most unique vacation destinations in the United States. You can be in one of the quietest or most action-packed regions, depending on what you're looking for, yet while really being surrounded by well-known cities of Western New York. In this region, you have the long narrow lakes, the waterfalls, the charming small towns, some old industrial cities, the wineries, the farms, and the rolling hills and mountains. But herein lies the issue. If you don't plan on visiting every single lake, you have to pick and choose. And in this video, we'll be ranking the lakes from lowest to highest priority to visit. I would say worst to best, but how could we even say that? Anyway, let's start with the lowest priority lake to visit. In fact, the bottom 4 are going to be the westernmost lakes here, which are also the smallest, with practically no towns on any of them. The lowest priority is this one, Hemlock Lake. It's the 3rd smallest, 4th shortest, and it's completely undeveloped, as it's used as a water supply for the city of Rochester, about 25 miles to the north. There's also very little access to the lake. There is a decent park at the northern end, practically in the middle of nowhere with no civilization nearby. Yet there were a considerable amount of people there the time I visited, and there is a boat launch at the southern end of the lake at a random pullout off Route 15A, and only small boats are allowed. There are no trails around the lake or anything, so boating is the only other way to enjoy this lake. Number 10 is the lake right next door, less than 2 miles east, Canadice Lake. This is the smallest, shortest, and narrowest lake, and it is also used as water supply for Rochester, and has all the same boat and development restrictions as Hemlock Lake. And there aren't any major parks on this lake, but there is a trail around it on the west side, and a road right on it on the east side, so it's easier to actually take it all in. But still, I'd pick any other lakes over these two, unless I wanted to just get away from everyone and everything. Number 9 is Honeoye Lake, less than 3 miles east of the last one. There is development on the lake, but it's mostly just private houses, and there's one small park at the northern end, by the hamlet of Honeoye. The mountains around the lake are a little lesser, and this lake just seems pretty uninteresting in comparison to the others, but it's easier to access, and it still will be off the beaten path, if that's what you're looking for. Number 8 is Conesus Lake, the westernmost Finger Lake, and the 5th smallest. This is the most crowded of the western Finger Lakes, as there's the often crowded Vitale Park at the north end, at the hamlet of Lakeville, right near the village of Livonia, and it's right off Interstate 390, so this naturally attracts more passersby. There's also a smaller park near the middle of the lake on the western side, and a fishing area at the southern end, so there are more recreational activities with this lake, but the scenery is lacking. It's completely flat all around the lake, and I don't love how visible this water tower is from the park, but it is what it is. Number 7 is Otisco Lake, the easternmost lake, and the 4th smallest of them all. There isn't a ton of civilization on it, and it's used as a water supply for Onondaga County. There's a small park near the north end, but the most notable feature is the causeway near the southern end. I know on the satellite the color of the water changes. But this used to be a roadway, which was never repaired after it was flooded away in the 20th century. It could be accessed from the west side, and it is a popular fishing spot, but that's about it. Up next, number 6 is Owasco Lake. I like this lake better because it seems more festive, as there are more recreational uses due to its proximity to civilization. The north end of the lake is just south of the city of Auburn, and the south end is just north of the village of Moravia, which in turn is right next to Fillmore Glen State Park, where there are highly visible waterfalls. Yeah, we haven't talked much about the waterfalls yet in this video, but here we go. Now at the north end, there's a large park, or series of parks, as well as marinas, so there's way more boat traffic. The connection to the city of Auburn isn't great, as you have to go by a cemetery and the high school campus before reaching anything of interest, like the Harriet Tubman sites. But it has all the attractions of the other lakes so far, like it's still completely peaceful around the middle of the lake, if that's what you're into. It just has more at the northern end. Number 5 is Skaneateles Lake. It's well known due to the village at its northern end, Skaneateles. Every tourism website goes on and on about how great this village is. And I do agree, to an extent, and you can see that in my most watched video. So to keep it brief, the northern end has a very nice touristy village with 2 waterfront parks and a pier, And on both sides of the village around the lakeshore, you're mostly seeing expensive houses with large lawns. And there's a golf course too. Then the middle part of the lake is rural with houses far apart, and then it's completely mountainy at the southern end, without many access points, and you can take the road south to the village of Homer. The popular part obviously is the northern end, but it's a lovely lake. For a while, it was known as the cleanest Finger Lake, and it's used as a water supply for the city of Syracuse, 15 miles to the northeast. In any event, this lake is definitely worth checking out, even if just at the village. Number 4 is Canandaigua Lake. This one just feels different than all the others so far on this list. Let's start at the northern end, at the city of Canandaigua. This whole city just feels different too, especially compared to other upstate New York cities. There is a downtown, but everything seems generally spread out. And to get to the waterfront, you have to cross US 20, and then everything changes. Along the lake are a ton of luxury housing developments, yacht clubs, hotels, a golf course, a performance venue, and touristy restaurants. This is the only Finger Lake with anything like this. I won't say it's like Florida, but it's the closest to it of any of the lakes. There is a nice pier with old boathouses, and a nice view of the lake, and a view of one of the only islands in the Finger Lakes, although it's usually completely claimed by seagulls whenever I'm there. And there is a nice waterfront park, that being Kershaw Park, although there are shopping centers right behind it. Anyway, to get to the calmer Finger Lakes feel, you have to get south out of the city. The lake itself is interesting, as it's completely flat all around the north half of the lake, but then it completely changes at the southern half, as the mountains get quite dramatic and picturesque. However, with generally more people, there are more parks, access points, and beaches. A couple miles south of the southern end is the small village of Naples, where it feels like a grape and wine haven, or at least that's how it's advertised. I know we haven't talked much about wineries yet, but this is our first mentioning of it. And in total, the southern end of the lake feels completely different from the northern end, but I hope you get to check out any of it when you get the chance. Now we're at the top 3, and I hope none of you argue that these are indeed the top 3. And now, if you're into wineries, these final 3 lakes are where most of them are at. Number 3 is the notorious Y-shaped lake. I'm talking, of course, about Keuka Lake. There are no large cities, but it's just a nice lake all around with nice things at all 3 ends. At the southern end is the village of Hammondsport, which is small and charming with a nice center and a bunch of bed and breakfasts and a quaint waterfront park. There's also another waterfront park and beach just south of the village. Nothing overwhelming, not a ton of traffic, and it can be nice and relaxing. At the northwest branch of the lake, there's no village, but there is Keuka Lake State Park. And the part between the northern branches is almost completely remote and mountainy with some farms. Near the northeastern end is the hamlet of Keuka Park and Keuka College, and at the northeast end is the village of Penn Yan. I like this village, but the downtown is a little downstream from the end of the lake, and the lakefront is not as interesting. I also talk about this in my most watched video. There are 2 small waterfront parks here, but they're sort of nestled between the marina and hotel. But all around the lake, there's plenty of nice scenery and hills, and it's just an awesome place to visit. Enjoy! And that just leaves the 2 largest Finger Lakes, the obvious top 2. And it's really hard to pick between these 2. So before we do, let's go over some honorable mentions. People often associate these lakes with the Finger Lakes, despite them not being in the same lake system. For the record, all of the Finger Lakes, by definition, drain into Lake Ontario, and then still, Onondaga and Oneida are not considered Finger Lakes either. And here is where I'd rank them if they counted. Anyway, I'm sorry to have to pick a runner-up, but number 2 is Seneca Lake. I'm sure some of you will disagree, so give me your arguments in the comments. Anyway, Seneca Lake is the largest Finger Lake of them all, with some awesome destinations and probably the most wineries. So many things to talk about, so let's start with the southern end, which is the village of Watkins Glen. It's a nice gridded village with 2 waterfront parks and a couple salt factories. But most importantly, it has perhaps the most awesome state park with a large gorge and plenty of waterfalls. That's Watkins Glen State Park. And there's the unmistakable gazebo from all the tourist photos with the name of the lake on it. But then, it's nearly 34 completely peaceful miles north up the lake. Some highlights include Hector Falls, and the small, not that interesting village of Dresden on the west side, the hamlet of Willard and the gigantic Sampson State Park on the east side, with some old military ruins that I discussed in my New York State Parks video, as well as Watkins Glen. Then, at the northern end of the lake, is the city of Geneva, which maybe it's not the most interesting city in the state, but it really does function as a nice old lakefront city. Like Canandaigua, it's sort of cut off from the waterfront by US 20, but the downtown is nicer in my opinion. But what I really like about the setup is that basically the entire northern end of the lake is completely parkland, and walkable parkland for that matter. There are paved waterfront trails, a beach at Seneca Lake State Park, large lawns, the Finger Lakes Welcome Center, and a couple of piers in the city. It's as if they want to attract people specifically for the lake, and in my opinion, they have succeeded here. With just this one lake, you can have everything you like about the Finger Lakes, whether you want activities or quiet solitude. This lake has to be on your bucket list. But there's one more on this list, so let's talk about it right now. Cayuga Lake is the second largest lake, but the longest, at nearly 39 miles long. I'm guessing it's the most visited of the lakes, simply because it has the largest city of them all, and it's one of my absolute favorite cities in New York State. I'm talking, of course, about Ithaca. And it's not just me. It's my most watched video that I don't talk in. It's known for being the home to Cornell University, and Ithaca College is just south of town as well. Then, all throughout the city and surrounding region is a ton of creeks with large gorges and waterfalls, all of which lead to the lake. The only downside of Ithaca is that downtown is not well connected to the lakefront, although there are two large waterfront parks, the most notable one being Stewart Park. Then, just north of the suburbs on both sides, the east side has the large Myers Park, and the west side has Taganock Falls State Park, which has a lakefront section, but more notably, the tallest waterfall in New York State, just a mile inland. Then, continuing north, it's completely quiet for 10 miles before you get to Long Point State Park and 3 lovely waterfront villages on the east side. Aurora is up first, which is small, but with some nice small buildings, and the campus of the recently closed Wells College. Then, Union Springs is next, which is the most substantial of the villages, although still small, but it has a legitimate downtown and a waterfront park. And then, the village of Cayuga is near the north end, but it's not really much. The north end of the lake is pretty marshy, and there is the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, but you're not really on the lake anymore with that. The town of Seneca Falls is right at the northern end as well, but the famous former village is 2 miles west, so it's not a waterfront town either. But most people visit this lake because of Ithaca, and all the cultural attractions and wonderful viewpoints of the lake and waterfalls all around. And this is the best place to begin your Finger Lakes journey. So maybe someday, I'll see you there. Well, thank you for tuning in, and it's hard to go wrong with the Finger Lakes. Do let me know your favorites or least favorites in the comments. And if you live in New York, you gotta check these out. And if you don't live in New York but have been to these lakes, what do you think of them? Was it worth the trip? We'll see you next time on Explore the Northeast. Thanks for watching.